Monday afternoon, everyone. Jared A. Chambers here with Command Briefing. Thanks for joining. Welcome to the program. Busy last few days, and for those of you who are listening live, trying something new, this is an early afternoon edition of Command Briefing, playing around with the time for the live audience a little bit. If you're listening on a recording, if you're downloading the podcast later, shouldn't make much difference. But we're looking for new ways to engage the live audience as this continues to grow, and we're trying an early afternoon format. Anyway, enough about that. Hope you had a great weekend. We were last here on Thursday, and we talked about Thursday. Trump was coming into the Fulton County Hooscow to be processed in on the RICO charges by Fat Fannie Willis. And the timing sort of sucked because going into the program, I knew that Trump was coming in and we were off broadcast by the time he was coming out. And now, certainly unless you have been buried under a log somewhere, completely oblivious to anything going on, you have seen the most iconic mugshot in ages. A mugshot that will go in the history books, one that everyone will remember. And once again, they could not get the better of Trump as much as they tried. It was one of those things, so many things in politics, and I try to avoid this. When I put out opinions on certain events as they happen, I purposefully avoid other people's opinions before giving my own, because there's so much spin out there. And one of the only ways that you can make sure that you're saying what you think and not what somebody else wants you to think is by observing and giving the classic hot take on it. Not even waiting to kick it around in your own mind and talk yourself out of something. This was, as soon as I saw it, I'm like, he nailed them. This picture absolutely nailed them. I think some people expected, maybe he would go the smiling route. If you look back at classic smiles, I mean, certainly Jenna Ellis went with that approach. David Schaefer did as well with these charges. Not the first time that's been done. Remember Tom DeLay, very, very high-ranking Republican from like 20 years ago. And when he was brought up on charges, and all of that was very much politically motivated too. Tom DeLay was never my favorite Republican, but certainly the charges against him were scurrilous also. And he went with the big smile. The big old grin says, "You can't get me down." Trump did what only Trump could do. He went with a scowl, but it was very much a "I'm coming to get you" scowl. It is a revenge scowl. It is "you have not seen the last" scowl. What it immediately put me in mind of, and this is my hot take that I had put on Twitter, it very much reminded me of the old publicity photos for The Apprentice. Back first season Apprentice, when Donald Trump had kind of laid low for a little while. I mean, certainly he had, over the years, has done certain media appearances. But those of you who have followed Donald Trump's career very big in the 80s, on all kinds of programs, Oprah Winfrey, I think Donahue. For goodness sake, the man was on This Old House back in the 80s. I remember that. The tabloids couldn't get enough. That continued into the 90s, certainly with the breakup of his first marriage and then the whole thing getting with Marla Maples. The media just couldn't get enough Trump. But then there were some harder years for Trump. Real estate and a lot of things that he had built on through the 90s hadn't panned out. I mean, certain things in the economy didn't pan out for a lot of people the way they had hoped. But certainly he had his share of hard times in business. And after the whole Marla Maples thing, he was maybe somewhat less prominent in media than he had been across the previous decade or so. So when he did The Apprentice, and this is almost 20 years ago too, back in 2004, if memory serves, that was the image and the brand for Donald Trump for that. It was the role of the overseer, the person who was looking to add someone to his team, but was going to hold them accountable, was going to be looking over their shoulder. The person who was going to bring them all into the boardroom and tell someone, "You're fired." And I remember all the publicity photos for that. And it was a very similar look to what you see in the Fulton County mugshot of just that glowering stare that says, "I'm watching. And I'm going to hold you accountable." And that is what he is telling the people who are coming after him. I am going to hold you accountable. It is not for you to hold me accountable. I have done nothing wrong. This is a farce. This is a joke. This is Lord of the Flies, and everyone has gotten in over their heads, out over their skis with this attempt to bring down Donald Trump. And the look says, "I will hold you accountable." And over the course of a few hours, he raked in millions. The last number I heard over the weekend was $7.1 million associated with selling merchandise with the photograph and getting small donations coming in directly behind the booking in Fulton County. So pretty amazing. And once again, I mean, that's the story of it. People see through this and they see what it is. They are doing what they can to help. And usually the most direct way someone can help is by opening up their wallet, and that registers, "Hey, I am in support of this." It is the most visceral response that someone can give in the moment of, "I want to participate, I want to help. What do? I open up my wallet." And they have been. And the polls have been reflecting strength for President Trump. We'll go through some in a moment, but the polls have been very good, and they're not accomplishing what they have set out to do, which is to nix Trump from the election, because they do not know that they can beat him. One might even say they do not believe that they can beat him. I mean, when you look at the lengths that they had to go to back in 2020, it would be hard to pull off the exact same fraud again. Certainly, you could duplicate large pieces of it simply because a lot of the laws haven't been fixed. And in some cases where they were breaking the law in 2020, they have since went back and codified those procedures into law. So they have certain advantages in that regard. But they had to come up with a whole lot of fraudulent ballots to only come out about 43,000 ahead where it mattered. And there is no predicting exactly where it's going to matter. I mean, certainly there are key states, and Georgia, Arizona, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania will continue to be key states in that regard. But even duplicating those cheats, that doesn't help you if he pulls a surprise out of his hat somewhere else. I mean, that's how they were not able to sufficiently rig it in 2020. For all of the work that they did to rig that election, Michigan wasn't even on their radar. And Michigan not even being on their radar sunk them heavily, very much hurt them. So, as I have tried to tell my audience here and on Twitter, if you're looking at 24 as a simple replay of 2020, you should probably turn in your credentials for doing any kind of political analysis. It is not a mere replay. Circumstances are different. People have lived under Biden for 2.5+ years now. By the time the election rolls around, they will have lived under this tyranny, this god-awful time of the whimpering 20s. They will have experienced 4 years of this. And people are not happy. And why should they be? They can't afford groceries. They can't afford fuel. They can't afford to go out and buy a house if they have not bought one. Cars are hard to afford if you can find what you want at all. And this will only get worse, by the way. We are seeing the front end. Some people are still quite comfortable. They bought a house before the 2020s, maybe even as recently as 5-6 years ago. They have a car that runs and is paid off. They haven't had to deal with some of this. But, let's say what happens if you have to sell your house and move, maybe for job-related reasons. Well, even though the value of your house has gone up, wherever you choose to buy, the prices will also have gone up. So whatever proceeds that you get from the sale of your house, gone. Just gone. Because you're going to need that money to buy another. It's anything comparable. Plus, dealing with the fact that the interest rates have more than doubled for these people who were buying in the late 2010s. Yeah, I have a friend. She bought a house 6 years ago, but around this time in 2017, looking at 3.25%. Now the entry level is what, 7%? If somebody like that has to sell their house, now they're upside down because all the proceeds go to the purchase price of the new house, plus they lose that interest rate that they had, and now it's more than double. They are really slammed. That is why no one is giving up their home if they can help it, and why we continue to see supply deficits. So things will get worse. Biden on the trail will only look worse in terms of record and his inability to even speak coherently for any period of time. And Trump is the number one candidate against him. He is the competitor, whether you like that or not. That is his competitor. This primary is over. Get tired of saying it, but it's true. And not only are they not sure that they can defraud Trump again, you could probably say that they're pretty sure that they can't, because people are upset, angry. They are ready to punish someone, you would hope, except for the Republican Party itself still refuses any kind of impeachment inquiry, only talks about it for all of the dealings of Biden and his family cartel of bribery. They refuse to do anything on that. They refuse to stand up for Trump. The debate stage, we've talked about that. That was an unimpressive show all the way around, really, unless your desire is to go back to the 2012 way of doing things, and look how well that worked for everyone. So, even though Trump's doing well, the party as a whole is doing bad, and the party is becoming a boat anchor to the whole thing. Winning is going to require Trump. Of course, they're willing to lose in many ways to get rid of Trump. So, this is something that we have to be aware of with the Republicans, and we can't take anything for granted, but Trump is exceeding, and he's growing, and they have a problem. And we're going to talk about what they're trying to do to solve that problem, and what's working and what is definitely not going to work as soon as we come back from this break. If you'll stand by, we'll be right back. We'll talk about it. Welcome back to the program, folks. You're listening to Command Briefing for Monday, August the 28th. It is Jared A. Chambers here with you. And this morning in D.C., there has been a hearing that took place regarding trial date for the D.C. charges brought by Special Prosecutor Jack Smith in the courtroom of Judge Chumbawamba Chutkan. I'm not really sure how to pronounce the name, and don't really care to know. I know that she is a rabid partisan. Her own statements in her own courtroom have proven that, and she is very much biased against the defendant in this case, one President Donald Trump. But the hearing was to set a trial date, and this is an absolute joke of a trial date, given every piece of evidence involved and the need to do discovery. We're looking at March 4th. Now, where have you heard March 4th before? That is the date that Fani Willis was pushing for in Atlanta for a trial date. If that seems like probably not a coincidence to you, you are very astute. That is the day before Super Tuesday. Do you think somebody involved in running a primary for president of the United States might like to get out and do a little campaigning the day before Super Tuesday, perhaps on Super Tuesday itself, but instead will have his hands tied potentially in a courtroom? Yeah, that's not a coincidence. And what you're looking at is, of course, blatant election interference, which is what this is. But you're also looking at what any honest attorney will tell you is a pretty blatant violation of the defendant's rights, as far as the defense having an opportunity to review all the evidence, to present their case, to put together their case. And this will, of course, undoubtedly result in an appeal. Whatever conviction you get, automatic appeal. They are not worried about the appeal. They are worried about the election. Now, Julie Kelly, who I very much admire, she has expected all along a superseding indictment in this case, something that Smith has already done in the Florida case with the Mar-a-Lago documents, and expected a superseding indictment related to January 6th, specifically coming out of this, and more along the lines of the seditious conspiracy that many of the J6 defendants have been charged with. And I don't like to bet against Julie Kelly. And in fact, I dislike that concept so much. I'm not going to bet against Julie Kelly. She's very tuned into these things. But Jack Smith does have a conundrum here, which is, do I want to do anything to upset the apple cart of the win that I got here, which is interfering with the primary right at Super Tuesday? There's a good argument to be made that he would not do that, even though he would lose the opportunity to perhaps maybe wreak some more damage with additional charges. But the argument against that is, so far, additional charges haven't damaged Trump, they've helped him. The trial date might do more to actually damage Trump. And as far as the whole idea of conviction goes and appeal, you have to understand, and we're going to talk some more about this, this process is really the punishment. Certainly, there is a very rabid side of the Democrat Party that wants to see Donald Trump in prison. They desire it. They have desired it for years. I mean, going back to when he won and back when Russia collusion was all the rage, there has been this fantasy amongst the most hardcore left that Trump is destined for prison. And that is something, they would love to turn that into a self-fulfilling prophecy with all of the control that they have of the levers in government. And you might say there's a real risk that they're going to get what they want. But then you see, they're more concerned on the prosecutorial side and the judicial side of simply messing up this campaign for Trump, even at the cost of setting their own grounds to be overturned and appealed in court by a higher court. And so all of this has had me thinking, over the last few days, particularly after the overreach of Fulton County and just how ridiculous that it is. And the question becomes, is Jack Smith going to try to keep up with Fani Willis and just, keep lobbing on more ridiculous charges to see who can, in fact, be the most ridiculous and throw the most red meat to the vociferous left? Or are they going to be more strategic with it? Because they also have a conundrum that they have yet to solve in all of this, that they've never, in my mind, thought about. The prosecutorial stuff was meant to take Trump out of the race early on. This was supposed to be the nipping it in the bud move. This wasn't the nuclear move. This is the preventive medicine move. They thought Trump would crater in the polls, that people would tire of sending money thinking, okay, it's just going to get all sucked up by legal bills and lawyers. And it's going to wipe Trump out of the campaign, at which point, once they got what they wanted, I have little doubt they would have tried to ruin Trump's reputation as much as possible. Maybe even have pressed forward with the trials to get a conviction, to get that asterisk that they want by his name in the history books, even more than the 2 impeachments. But what they never really planned on was sending the man to prison. And I know you're shocked by this. You're shocked to hear me say this. What? These rabid partisans, Jared, you're telling me they don't want to send him to prison? Well, the problem is that they really can't. They have what I have started to recognize as the SWAT problem. And you may not remember, so about 20 years ago, the old TV show SWAT, they turned into a movie with Samuel L. Jackson. And the whole plot around this is where they take down this big international kingpin. And tell me, do you remember this line from the movie if you watched it?
$100 million to whoever gets me out of here.
$100 million is what he screamed, the price that he put to the world. Get me out of prison, you will be rewarded. And although that is a very fictional sort of thing, it does highlight a real world problem. Nobody's ever locked up a president of the United States before in a federal prison or a state prison. It raises the question, what in the hell do you do? It is nothing that has ever been envisioned. It is nothing that has ever been discussed. There is no set process except for laws that have been put in place to secure the president of the United States after his term in office, because he does possess state secrets, if only his own knowledge, that retained in his mind. He also becomes a target for blackmailers. He becomes a target for those who just want a feather in their cap against the United States of America. The president, once he has been president, gets lifetime Secret Service protection amongst other privileges of office for a reason. That once you've been president, you can't ever not be president. The title lasts forever because who and what you represent lasts forever. And there's no way to secure that in a federal prison, much less a state prison. They don't have a means to do it, folks. They just don't. There is no way to secure Donald Trump in a prison. And some have said, well, okay, we sort of get that. They could place him under house arrest. How is that different? How is it different? You would not be able to sufficiently exclude this man from being targeted, especially if he was simultaneously president of the United States, as in former, but also enemy of the United States, as in prisoner. This would be a ready target for any of our adversaries to openly try to jailbreak. Hey, we'll bring you to our country and we won't extradite you, hoping to get something in return. Not saying that Trump would go for that, but it becomes a real problem that all of the analysis is missing in all of this. You have to secure the president of the United States for life, for the entirety of his life. And they can't do that in the context of making him an inmate. So the process is what they're using to try to take him down a notch and keep him out of office. And once getting a show trial conviction and off of the national stage, I have no doubt that after people's eyes were averted and Biden comes back into office, it would either be some sort of commutation of sentence, leaving the conviction but commuting the sentence, or some other legal wrangling means so that they never have to send him to prison. I'm right about this, folks. I mean, stop and really think about it and what I've said, and you'll realize it's true. They don't have a plan right now beyond using the lawfare to just screw up his campaign. And that's presenting a real problem because since it's not working, what spaghetti will they throw against the wall to see if it will stick next? Hang in there. We're going to take our middle of the road break, and we'll be right back in just a minute. And welcome back to the bottom of the hour for Command Briefing. And if you're listening live with us, it's actually the top of the 2 o'clock hour here in the afternoon, Eastern time, yes, Monday, August the 28th. We've about wiped out the month of August, going into fall, going into September, going into an even more heated primary season as things heat up across the fall. More debates, to be sure, of the lower tier, the JV team of candidates. And this was also true, too. Now, we've already talked about impressions of the debate itself. And, of course, my rule still applies. I try to put out my opinions very quickly and not really want to be swayed by the spin, because spin is part and parcel of the debate thing. I mean, that's why they have the spin room. And what was interesting is there was a real attempt. It was certainly a dishonest attempt. And I mentioned this. I mentioned the little row with Dana Lash's wife, Chris, and his attempt to be internet tough guy and want to whoop my behind, because I called him out for being a liar, for saying that the polls had shifted after the debate and that his guy, DeSantis, was leading the betting markets, which was demonstrably untrue. But in the meantime, after that, Fox, who hosted the debate, and by all accounts, and this is why Trump didn't go, has been in the pocket of DeSantis very much during the campaign. They released a poll along the way showing that DeSantis really had the better of it, although some others had a not horrible night. It was really favorable towards DeSantis, and their commentary on their shows all reflected this. And, you know, everyone from Kayleigh McEnany to others ringing the praises of Governor DeSantis, who, as I said, it's not that he had the worst night ever. He didn't. He just didn't have a great night, and he needed a great night. He needed a night that was going to obviously separate himself from the others in the lower tier so that he could reinforce the narrative that it's really me and Trump. It's not me and you guys. It's me and Trump. Because that's been the narrative going back for a long time, like over a year amongst the talking heads. But certainly all of this year, that has been the narrative, that it's just DeSantis and Trump. And I've always said, Trump is his own animal. Trump is very much his own animal. I knew, even when I had some reservations about it, and once upon a time I admit that I did, even when I had reservations about it, I knew that if Trump decided that he wanted to run, he was the de facto nominee. It was his to lose because he does have a loyal base. He was treated unfairly. And he essentially is running even now as an incumbent rather than being an open primary. So this is uncharted water. You have an incumbent and an open primary happening all at the same time. As it has turned out, Trump has only more solidified his position as the incumbent, harder to knock off. But what you see amongst the JVs, the lower tier, it's playing out exactly like you would expect a primary to, which is why I was always dubious of this idea that it can only be Trump or DeSantis. Like, why does it have to be DeSantis? There have been other governors who were recognized widely as being good governors for their states and popular, who massively failed as national candidates. Massively. Scott Walker, Rick Perry. Chris Christie would fit this model, even though he ended up leaving office pretty unpopular. But he was very popular once upon a time and would have been maybe considered more so back in his earlier runs for president. So there's always, Jeb is always the classic example too, as governor of Florida, running in 2016. That was supposed to be unbeatable too. But, the DeSantites have always tried to use that as a counter case. Well, Jeb led and then lost. So that's why we think we can beat Trump. Jeb never led in the way that Trump is leading. Not by as much. And not as, being kind of lumped in with a core of other candidates. I mean, 2016 looked different. Initially, Jeb was leading, but I think if I remember right, he was in the 20s. And there were other candidates who had, double-digit, high teens, low 20s kind of support. And then Trump came in and really started to grow. But that's what you see in open primaries. Even when you have a leader, candidates tend to be positioned pretty closely together in the upper tier. Maybe there's a separation that's clear between the upper tier and the lower tier of 1%ers. But an open primary has typically been that. It's truly open. It shifts. Leading doesn't mean much in an open primary because nobody leads by such a massive amount. But amongst the JV team, DeSantis is no longer way out ahead of those other guys. He already had Ramaswamy nipping on his heels, and it was always going to be the case that once you do a debate, anyone can gaffe and screw up, or anyone can come out and impress. And so once DeSantis was competing with that lower tier, it was always obvious to me he was going to have to fight for this. And he did not excel Wednesday. He didn't kill himself, but he didn't excel. Ramaswamy did better than expected, and you know that that's true. And I'm not on the Ramaswamy train. This is not me pumping the guy up because I love him. This is me telling you he positioned himself well by being prepared and knowing what time it is. And any of the other candidates could have taken that tact and just simply were too arrogant to do so. But the voters seem to think that the man acquitted himself fairly well on the national stage. And in spite of that Fox poll, those initial impressions that we were hearing from the focus groups, well, guess what? Now that there's more polling available, and it's not by the very group that was trying to bias the debate in the first place, we see that Americans pretty much go along with those first impressions that we once upon a time that night knew that everyone had. If we look at that, if you watch the presidential debate, the Republican presidential debate, who do you think won? This is from Insider Advantage. Ramaswamy at 22%. I mean, not running away with it, but that's impressive. Nikki Haley, who nobody likes except her donors in D.C., she comes in at 21%. Most people recognize, as much as they don't like the warmonger Nikki, there's something about her, and it doesn't work for me, but her style and her way of communicating and ability to score points in a debate, she is not unskilled at this. And the numbers reflect it. 21% think that she won. DeSantis comes in at 15%. Not bottom of the barrel, but again, reinforces exactly what I said. He had an okay night. He didn't have the night he needed to put it to bed to even be, again, the solid runner-up in this. He is going to have to continue to fight to hold on to second place, and I have serious doubts that he can do it at this point. One more performance like this, where others outshine him by such an obvious amount, and pretty obvious gaffes on stage, like looking around before deciding which way you're going to go on an issue, that could serve to take him out of this much more quickly than anyone in his team wants to admit, because they're still spinning that he's the guy. He's the guy not just to be second place. He's the guy who's eventually going to overtake Trump. Serious. I mean, I wonder at this point if any of them even believe it, or the point is just to do maximum damage to Trump by dragging this out. And I tend to think that it's the latter, because I have a hard time believing anyone is stupid enough to believe that Trump can be overtaken. And even if he could, that those votes are going to flush to DeSantis. Because they simply would not. They simply would not. I mean, you have the Trumper busters who would write in his name if he did not appear on a ballot at all, and wouldn't go to anyone else. But certainly amongst others, yeah, DeSantis would probably pick up a few of the fair weather supporters, but so would Ramaswamy. Even somebody like Tim Scott might, who seems, maybe not as objectionable and not as loud and grating in their attempts to attack Trump, the man, personally. So that Insider Advantage poll is a big deal. And that group, Matt Towery, they're out of Georgia. I'm familiar with them. They are not a fly-by-night polling outfit. They're like a lot of polling outfits. Have they nailed every one? No. Should you disregard this as like some kind of weird outlier that has an agenda? No, that's not who Insider Advantage is. Pay attention to that particular poll. And we're going to talk about a couple more polls here in a minute. We'll take the last break of the show, and we'll come back in just a moment. Welcome back as we go into the last segment of Command Briefing. Thank you for joining this afternoon. If you're listening live, I certainly appreciate it. Otherwise, make sure you can listen, tell your friends about this if they have not heard it. This program can be downloaded from Spreaker, iHeart, Spotify, Amazon Music, quite a few podcast platforms I hadn't even heard of before doing this podcast. You can get out there, Google, Command Briefing Podcast. You'll find me out there for anyone who wants to listen just on their preferred platform. If you're finding me through Twitter, as always, thank you. And anyone else, you can find me on Twitter at C4CEO. And this is what we do. We talk about the news of the day in politics, business, culture, and otherwise. And this is your quick analysis from the front lines of things that are going on in the world. And it's geared toward those busy people who want to get a quick rundown, looking for also some just fellowship and support out there in the battle that we are all waging against the overreach, the just boot on our necks that we have felt for a long time now from a government that's way too large and a government that just simply won't represent or listen to us, but which has really went off the rails here, particularly this decade. And we're going to continue to bring those stories, but also continue to talk about ways of how you insulate and isolate yourself from the effects of everything that's going on. So anyone who you know who is like-minded on those topics, please share anywhere you can on Twitter, again, at C4CEO. Share a link of the podcast with a friend and also let them know they can find it out there if they'll look. Search engine, look up Command Briefing Podcast. Look up Command Briefing, Jared A. Chambers. You'll find it out there. So I appreciate you in your help to spread the word. And as promised, a few more polls. We have one from Schoen Cooperman. 2024 presidential election poll. Trump 45%, Biden 44%. And asking the question, when he was in office, did you approve or disapprove of the job Trump did as president? Approve 52%, disapprove 44%. Those are pretty good numbers, especially when you look at Biden's job approval as being a flip of that. His approval at 44%, disapproval at 54%. It does tell you some things. Now, I've always said this isn't a shoo-in for Trump. It's just not. I mean, he has a lot of winds moving at his back and a lot of growing support, and he very much can win, and they are worried about that. That's their need to go after him. But as I talked about earlier in the program today, you have the Republican Party itself acting as a boat anchor towards the indisputed face of the party, leader of the party, as far as the public at large is concerned. That will continue to grow and be a bigger problem, that dichotomy between the Republican Party, which everyone pretty much hates, and Trump himself, which has support widely in the Republican Party as voters, but also gets voters who were traditionally just disengaged from the process. So Trump will have work to do when he's still in a statistical tie with Biden, but this is better than his poll performance 4 years ago. It's better than his, well, I said four, meaning the last election cycle, 2020. So not 4 complete years ago, but last election cycle. Better than his performance then, better than his performance in polls by far in 2016 when he caught everyone with their collective pants down. So, let's see. And you have to forgive me, I'm switching screens here to go through a few of these, and sometimes the tech is a little slow. Here's another one, and this is post-debate. It is a poll of the primary, but it's post-debate numbers from Kaplan Strategies. Trump at 45%, which is a slight downtick, and this is one of the polls that doesn't have Trump over 50, which itself is kind of a rare bird for a national poll. But what's significant here is who's in number 2 on this one, which is Ramaswamy. And DeSantis in third, holding even at his 10%. But if you look at second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh place, check these numbers. I mean, Ramaswamy, again, he's second. He's at 13%. And you say, okay, that 10% for DeSantis is still pretty close. But Nikki Haley also bumped up at 8%. She's, again, I don't like it. And I have my doubts whether she could swing enough voters to be a player in this, because a lot of people really distrust her, as I do, and for good reason. But she's also well-funded and well-connected, and I've said for 6 months at least, if not longer, that everyone is underestimating what that means for her in particular. Does it mean she can win? No, that's still up to the voters. Does it mean that she can be second place in this and run that head-to-head with Trump? I don't even know that she can do that. But can she be enough of a drag on the others at these debates by outperforming? And can she be enough of a nuisance to them by having money to spend and connections to endorse her that she deprives DeSantis, Ramaswamy, Tim Scott, anybody else of the ability to break out as a true contender against Trump? And I think so. I could see a primary shaking out where these numbers actually don't shift a lot. And they all end up trading that second spot for a long time to come. So that's to be aware of. Here's another poll from Emerson. Trump 46, Biden 44. That 2-point advantage is pretty solid. If you put Cornel West as a Green Party candidate in here, Trump comes out 44%, Biden 39%, Cornel West gets 4%. And if you look at the primary, Trump 50%, DeSantis 12%, Ramaswamy 9%, Pence and Haley both 7%. So the trend lines, again, which is what I like to focus on, showing very much a lot of the same information, which is the lower tier is still very much the lower tier. They're not a threat to Trump. they could all continue to switch places based on these debate performances, and performances are really what they are. They're not meaningful in much any other way. And it kills this whole argument that we've heard ad nauseum forever and ever and ever, amen, that Trump can't win. Obviously, if Trump is outperforming his numbers by polling that he's ever had, and he only lost, and I'm using air quotes here, lost 2020 by a total of about 43,000 votes in several key states, yeah, he can win. So anybody still pushing that line is just an abject idiot. He can win. The lower tier is the lower tier. And so they are going to have to continue their attempts to take down Trump by some other means because they've got nothing else that's going to work. One last poll, and this is Ledger 360. It's from several days ago, but still post-debate. Trump, 61%. DeSantis, 9. Ramaswamy, 5. Pence, 5. Yeah, the trend lines are clear, even if the polls continue to shift a little bit, folks. We'll continue to talk more about it tomorrow. We'll let you know what's new. If you catch this on Twitter, let me know if you listen live what you think of the new time slot or what time slots you prefer. Otherwise, I think we'll continue to try this throughout this week and see what works. In the meantime, I appreciate you listening to Command Briefing. I am Jared A. Chambers. We'll see you tomorrow.